So, welcome to anybody who's joined us on Facebook, and welcome to everybody else that's here this morning. Yeah, I understand what Todd was going on about when he was saying about, I don't know what to do with these glasses. I'm still getting used to the fact that my eyesight has flipped, where I was where I was very short-sighted and could read easily. Now I can't read anything that's in front of my face. So I'm hoping I'll be able to follow my notes. We're continuing with encounters with Jesus, but obviously these are now post-resurrection encounters. And I want to go straight into the word. So we begin. That same day, 2 of Jesus' followers were walking to the village of Emmaus, 7 miles from Jerusalem. As they walked along, they were talking about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things, Jesus himself suddenly came and began walking with them. But God kept them from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing so intently as you walk along?" They stopped short, sadness written across their faces. Then one of them, Cleopas, replied, "You must be the only person in Jerusalem who hasn't heard about all the things that have happened there in these last few days." I'm going to leave that up. This passage, which is written in Luke's Gospel, continues our Easter Sunday narrative, which we heard last week. The women, on arriving at the tomb to anoint Jesus' body with funeral spices, had discovered the stone moved from the entrance and the tomb itself was empty. 2 men in dazzling robes had appeared and informed the women that Jesus had been raised from the dead, just as he told them that would happen to him. They'd rushed back to tell the disciples, who, because they were women, didn't believe them. I can imagine that you're just typing it up, women, You're so upset about him, you're imagining things. Because women weren't allowed to be witnesses, which I think is very significant that Jesus chose women as witnesses. Then Peter went to check, and he found the tomb empty as well. Now, there are slight variations in all the other Gospels about who went with whom and when, which is understandable when you consider the trauma that they'd all gone through and what they were trying to record from that particular moment. And you know yourself, you see something really significant, really important, and get 10 people to describe it, and they'll all describe it slightly differently. But the event is still the same. So the fact that the Gospels are slightly different is irrelevant, really. Now we come back to the narrative later in the day when 2 of the followers had been in Jerusalem for the Passover and witnessed the events surrounding Jesus' death, are on their way back to the small town of Emmaus, which is approximately 7 miles to the west of Jerusalem. Only one of the individuals is identified, and that's Cleopas, which is a Greek contraction of the name Cleopatris. And he's probably one of the 70 disciples that Jesus sent out earlier in the Gospels. There's been much speculation as to who his companion might have been. Some people had him down as a brother-in-law to James. I'm not sure which James, whether that was James of James and John fame or James, Jesus' brother. I'm not sure who. Some had said, it's Nathaniel, and others have speculated that it might actually have been Cleopas, his wife. And why not? If you go to Passover for a festival, why wouldn't you take your missus with you? So it's a bit awkward because you can't talk about them as men, you can't talk about them as he and her. So we'll leave it that we don't know who his companion was, but he obviously had one. Whoever it was, they were discussing what had happened in Jerusalem and the gut-wrenching disappointment of having their hopes dashed by the death of the one they truly believed was going to be the Messiah, or was the promised Messiah. Can you imagine them? But what if? If only. Why? How? All those questions would have been going through as they'd gone over and over and over the events of the past couple of days. And suddenly, a fellow traveller catches up with them, and he walks with them, asking what they've been discussing. Now, they fail to recognise Jesus because the Bible tells us they were kept from recognising him. Why was that? We'll see a possible reason a little later on. But the two are stunned that someone on the road coming away from Jerusalem had missed out on what had happened. And Cleopas replies that he, who is Jesus, must be the only person who didn't know what was going on. What things? Jesus asked. The things that happened to Jesus, the man from Nazareth, they said. He was a prophet who did powerful miracles, and he was a mighty teacher in the eyes of God and all the people. But our leading priests and the other religious leaders handed it over to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. We'd hoped he was the Messiah who was come to rescue Israel. It all happened about 3 days ago. Then some women from our group of his followers were at the tomb early this morning, and they came back with an amazing report. They said his body was missing, and they'd seen angels who told them Jesus is alive. Some of our men ran out to see, and sure enough, his body was gone, just as the women had said. So Cleopas now summarises events for the stranger. He identifies Jesus of Nazareth as the focus of these events and calls him a prophet and a teacher, and the one who can perform miracles. They had hoped he was the Messiah, come to restore Israel to its former glory, but these hopes had been annihilated when he was put to death. As the Messiah can't possibly die, he's going to be a victorious warrior. They lay the blame for Jesus' death firmly at the feet of the leading priests and other religious leaders, not the Romans who had actually carried out the death sentence. And it's obvious that these two disciples had misunderstood Jesus' mission and ministry. Even the news that the women had found an empty tomb and had been told by angels that Jesus was alive, this had not triggered a recognition of the parts of Jesus' teaching and his prophecies concerning his own death and resurrection. All they knew, the body's missing. Then Jesus said to them, "You foolish people, you find it so hard to believe all that the prophets wrote in the scriptures? Wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have to suffer all these things before entering his glory?" Then Jesus took them through the writings of Moses and all the prophets, explaining from all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Now, Jesus calling these desolate followers fools seems extremely harsh, but the Greek, here we go, anoetoi, is better translated how dull you are, or how thoughtless you are. Even though they would have heard and possibly learnt the writings of the Old Testament prophets, they'd failed to apply that knowledge to the life and work of Jesus. Doesn't it say that the Messiah must suffer and die before he can enter his glory? And then Jesus takes them on a literary journey through the writings of the Old Testament, explaining how each passage referred directly to him. Now, remember how they'd been prevented from recognising Jesus? Can you imagine their reaction if they had recognised him? And I've invented a word here. Flabbergastedness. Excitement. Are we hallucinating? They certainly wouldn't have been in any fit state to do a Bible study with him. And it was more important that they understood who Jesus really was and how he had accomplished God's plan of redemption for the whole of mankind, not just the Jews. Now, there's over 450 Old Testament prophecies relating to the Messiah, and Jesus has already fulfilled over 300 of them. Some he won't fulfill until his second coming. But we look at just a few of the more obvious ones. I won't go through the whole 300 with the old model. So there's just some of them. If you want to sort of look them up when you get home, they're all there. But as I said, we're going through just a couple for you. So, beginning in Genesis 3:15. And it's God speaking to the snake after he's tempted Eve and Eve's tempted Adam. And because the snake did this, this is what God says to him. And I will cause hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. And then we move on. And this is relevant to our Passover meal. It's the Paschal lamb from Exodus 12. And I'm giving you a beginning and an end of a passage with the middle missed out because it's not relevant in this particular instance. This is just before the Jews are allowed to escape from Egypt, where they've been enslaved by Pharaoh for decades and sorely oppressed. And Moses has been told he is going to take them out of the land of Egypt. Then the whole assembly of the community of Israel must slaughter their lamb or young goat at twilight. They are to take some of the blood and smear it on the sides and top of the door frames of the houses where they will eat the animal. That same night they must roast the meat over a fire and eat it along with bitter salad greens and bread made without yeast. And there you've got our matzos with the pierced bread. Eat the meal with urgency, for this is the Lord's Passover. On that night I will pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn son and firstborn male animal in the land of Egypt. I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt, for I am the Lord. But the blood on your doorposts will serve as a sign, marking the houses where you are staying. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. This plague of death will not touch you when I strike the land of Egypt. And I hope you see the significance of that. And then we jump to Isaiah. Unto us a child is born. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing it and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. Now you recognise that obviously as one of the Christmas prophecies. And then we move on to the next one. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. Not a lot of people can do anything to influence that one. Not a lot of people could influence this one either. It was the Romans that actually decreed that Joseph had to go to Bethlehem. Otherwise, he would have stayed quite happily in Nazareth. Micah 5:2. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times. And then we get the prophecy of the Good Shepherd in Isaiah. See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and he rules with a mighty arm. See, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. And Jesus himself describes himself as the Good Shepherd. And he tells the parable of if there was just one sheep gone missing from 100, the shepherd, the Good Shepherd, would go and seek it out. I like the next one. And then we come to the lowly king. And if we listen to what Todd said about the entry into Jerusalem, where, they were expecting a warrior, they were expecting the Messiah to ride in triumph on a mighty steed, and he rides in on a donkey. And you've only got to look at the face and realise that's where Jesus laid his dignity down and rode in on a humble animal. And it also fulfilled the prophecy, rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Bless him. He looks happy anyway. And the one that culminates the whole thing, he who bore our griefs. And we skip back to Isaiah 53:4-5. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. For he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. And we go back to our narrative. By this time they were nearing Emmaus and the end of their journey. Jesus acted as if he was going on, but they begged him, stay the night with us, since it's getting late. So he went home with them. And as they sat down to eat, he took the bread and blessed it. Then he broke it and gave it to him. And suddenly their eyes were opened and they recognized him. And at that moment he disappeared. Their journey, which should have taken about 2 hours, perhaps at a gentle pace, had come to an end. It'd probably taken best part of a day, I should imagine, to go through all the Old Testament prophecies. I've just skimmed over them because you've heard them all countless times, and I'm not explaining them to you. But can you imagine Jesus actually talking through those prophecies with you, explaining them from his viewpoint, because he knew more than anybody exactly what they were referring to and what they meant and how they were fulfilled. But the journey's come to an end, their destination's reached. Yet Jesus had so captivated their hearts and their minds by his narrative that they were loath to part company with him. And when he would have continued onwards, they wouldn't let him go. They couldn't let him go. They begged him to remain with them and accept their hospitality. Jesus accepted the invitation to remain and went in with them to the place they were staying. Now you have to ponder the question, would Jesus have actually just carried on had they not said anything? And I believe the answer is yes, he would have done. Because Jesus never forces himself on anyone. He'd engaged with them. He'd imparted truth to Cleopas and his companion. He'd opened their eyes to see what had happened during Passover. And that what had happened was the culmination of God's plan to redeem mankind. Fancy having that all laid out for you so that it actually begins to make sense. Think, yeah, this is why it happened. This is why Jesus had to die the way he did. This is why he couldn't ride in as a victorious conqueror. Jesus had come with them. He provided what they needed and wanted at that particular moment, comfort in their grief and knowledge to help their understanding. So Jesus had given them what they needed. Having received that insight and reassurance, was it enough for them? And I think that's what Jesus was testing. Is that all you need from me? Understanding when you're swimming a bit and you can't make head nor tail of what's going on. Comfort when you're feeling upset and distressed. Is that all you need? I'll give you that. But do you want more from me? And I think he asks every single one that same question. He provides what we need when we need it. Do you want more from me? And these two, they'd been so captivated that they wanted more. So come in. Don't go. Come and tell. I can just imagine. Come and tell us more. Now, Jewish hospitality requires the sharing of a meal. And when the three sat down to eat, Jesus took up some bread, gave the Hebrew blessing, which is, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has brought forth bread from the earth." That's a bit Passover, is it not? Again, we'll say that 3 weeks' time. Standard Jewish blessing, they would have heard it countless times. But then he broke the bread, and something in that moment triggered a memory. Now, if they'd been part of the 70, they would have seen Jesus at meal times countless times. And he would have always done the same thing. Break the bread, give the blessing, break the bread, share it out. And you know when people do things that are natural to them, they always do it in the same way, and suddenly, that looks familiar. That moment of recognition, he disappeared from their sight. Now you would think at that point, oh, we wanted him to stay with us and he's gone. But they'd recognised it was Jesus. And what was more important at this precise moment, oh my goodness, he's alive. All that faffing in Jerusalem with the women and the disciples and the angels, and we've seen him. We've seen him for ourselves. We've recognised him. And over the next few weeks, as we look at other post-resurrection encounters, you'll see that Jesus' sudden disappearances are a common thread. He appears, he either teaches or does something with the people he's appeared to, and then as soon as that's completed, he disappears again. Basically, the poor guy, he's got 40 days before he goes into heaven in order to get these disciples on the path he wants them on. Is Jesus wanting you on a path? Do you know which path? Do you know where he's pointing you? Do you know where he wants you to go? Do you know what he wants you to do? Go to the end of the story. They said to each other, "Didn't our hearts burn within us when he talked with us on the road and explained the scriptures to us?" And within the hour they were on their way back to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 disciples and the others who'd gathered with them, who said, "The Lord really has risen. He appeared to Peter." Then the two from Emmaus told their story of how Jesus had appeared to them as they were walking along the road, and how they'd recognised him as he was breaking the bread. Now, when we spend time with the Lord, does our whole being glow from the inside? If you've ever tried to describe that sensation, it's so difficult. Words are just inadequate. If you've spent time in the presence of Jesus, if you've sat quietly and you feel him present with you, you really cannot describe it to anybody else. All you know is that something is stirring you up inside. There's an excitement, there's an anticipation, there's a glow, I can really feel his presence. These two described it as our hearts burned within us. They knew the source. The source is Jesus. And their immediate response is to abandon the meal and head back to Jerusalem to share the outstanding news with the other disciples. And within the hour is better translated as at that hour. So they didn't sit down and finish the dinner and then go. They abandoned everything and headed straight back. And I suspect the return journey took a heck of a sight shorter time than the outward one did. When they arrived, they received further confirmation that Jesus was truly risen from the dead, since Peter had also seen him. And then Cleopas and his companion recounted the tale of how they'd met Jesus on the road, how he talked them through all the scriptures, how he'd made it clear that what they'd learned and read in the Old Testament for the whole of their life suddenly made sense, and suddenly everything fell into place. And that's the difference between head knowledge and heart knowledge. So many people know the Bible, and it's up here. They can quote you chapter and verse. But for it to actually impact you, it has to travel from there to there. And measurement-wise, it's about a foot in old money. But it's the longest journey anything can ever make. Because it's so easy to just want to stick with the head knowledge and not take it into yourself and apply it and understand what it means for you. and then go with it. It's so easy to be intellectual about the Bible. I know this. My sister went to university and did a degree in theology. And she studied the book of John for 3 years and said at the end, I never want to open the Bible again. She knew a lot of knowledge, but it had not impacted her. Very pleased to say she's now a Christian and it's totally different. But just knowing the Bible, as we saw with these two, it doesn't necessarily impact you. The only person that can make it impact you is the Holy Spirit. And we have to invite him in. And how do we invite him in? By becoming a follower of Jesus. By accepting that what Jesus did was for me and Ruth and Joe and Sheila and Vince and Ali and Bex, who's sitting in the corner very quietly. Always does. He died for every single one of us. And I suspect most of us have invited him into our lives and said, yeah, Jesus, I accept what you did on my behalf. Thank you. Please come into my life. I want to be a follower of you. And the sign that we're a follower is that we are given the Holy Spirit. And then it's a case of Holy Spirit. Oh, please explain this. It's double Dutch to me. And if any of you want to do a Bible study, we're doing Revelation next at Seed Study. Feel free to come and be as foxed as the rest of us. Because we've just done Hebrews, and that was, yeah, not the easiest book to understand, but so meaningful. So, summaries, very quickly. What can we take away from this passage? So, firstly, God does not do what we expect. He does that which he has chosen to do since the beginning of time. His plans are not made up on the spur of the moment, and sometimes they can even seem calamitous to those who are involved with them, just as it had done to the two people in the story. They were devastated. And sometimes, when we're involved in certain of God's plans that we don't understand, we are equally as devastated. We don't know what the next step is to be. But God does. And he knows he will work it out. It will always, always, always work out for our best and for humanity's best. Because Jesus and God the Father and Jesus do not want anybody to be lost. So if we don't understand the plans and we don't understand what's happening, we hang on to our faith. Fingertips sometimes on the cliff edge. But he will never let us go. Secondly, since we may be just as devastated about our circumstances and the unsure of future as Cleopas and his friend, we need to spend time with Jesus. That's what they needed. They needed to sit, well, not necessarily sit because they were walking, but they needed to spend time with him so he could explain what was going on. And it takes time, and it takes willingness, and it takes our commitment to spend that time. Now I'm standing here telling you all what to do and how to do it, and I'll put my hand up and say, I am one of the worst people for giving Jesus time. But when I do, oh, the blessing you get. And I think, Alison, are you so stupid that you cannot see that when you do spend time with Jesus, you feel so much better, you understand, you're a better person. Why don't you do it more often? My excuse, and it is an excuse, is things get in the way. And I'm sure we've all used that. Yes. But that's what we need to do. We need to spend time with Jesus. And I suspect when they first were walking with him and they were telling him the facts, they got angry, they got resentful, they got frustrated. We thought this, why didn't it happen like that? They didn't hide their feelings. I have to say, they didn't know it was Jesus at the time, but they didn't hide their feelings. And we needn't hide our feelings from him either. We can let rip, because surprisingly, he's big enough to take it. That was the most enlightening thing I was ever taught. It's all right to be angry with God, because he's so big. Your anger isn't going to upset him. And offloading anger and frustration to God is a heck of a sight better than offloading it to the people around you. As I know to my cost and Paul knows to his cost. Right, thirdly, once we've poured ourselves out to him, we need to take time to listen and to wait for him to speak. And as he does, our hearts will respond with peace, with fervour, with encouragement, with a disappearing of anxiety. Whatever you have a heart yearning for at that moment, he will provide. Fourthly, from the last bit, the more time we spend in intimate communion with Jesus, the more time we'll want to spend. And finally, just as Cleopas rushed back to Jerusalem to share his experience with the other disciples, we need to be witnesses of how Jesus impacts our lives as an encouragement for others. It's fine spending time with Jesus and getting on what I suppose you could call a holy high. But there may be people who are on a hellish low at that precise moment. And by sharing how spending time with Jesus has impacted me and how it changed things and how I can see things differently, is such an encouragement for other people. We aren't meant to work in isolation from each other. Encourage, exhort, what's the other E? I can't remember.
Edify.
Edify, thank you. Knew those three. Encourage, exhort, edify. We need to lift each other up, build each other up, share our experiences. And at that point, I shall draw to a close. We do have some more songs, don't we? Good. We'll put this off now.
So just really quick.
Sorry.
Really quick before we start the song. Just a few things Alison said sparked some thoughts. One was the idea of not letting go of Jesus, and I think of Jacob, when he was wrestling with God, and he never let go. And it was quite a struggle, but he never let go. And he was forever changed as a result of that. And Jacob got a new identity, the name Israel. And he had a limp afterwards, but it was worth it because God had different plans for him. Instead of doing things his own way with his own understanding, God wanted to change him, to transform him, to give him a new identity and a new purpose, to become the namesake of the nation that he chose to show his glory through. That, and then also I was watching a video on YouTube, and I showed Ruth this. It was talking about how often parents try to deal with their children's emotions by trying to take a negative emotion and turning it into something positive. And in so doing, they don't allow their children to experience the negative and to help them process the negative emotions. And instead, the children get sort of stunted in their ability to handle troubles and problems. And then as they become adults, in adulthood, they experience anxiety. And when Alison was talking about our emotions and that God can handle them, it reminded me of that if you are going through hardship, don't try to mask it from God, because he knows already anyways, right? I mean, it sounds silly when I say it, but we do stuff like that all the time, don't we? Well, God, I'm too negative to pray right now. I'm too downcast to talk to you, Jesus. I've got to be my best self in front of God. That's nonsense. Jesus lived as one of us. He experienced the highs and lows of this existence, of this life. He understands, and he wants to help you be able to have understanding about how you're feeling, about what's going on in your life, to experience those highs and lows with him, and to be there to help you through that, to be able to process that and make sense out of what it means to live in this world and experience hardship and joy and trouble and breakthrough and all of the things that we experience in this life. Experience them with Jesus, and you'll experience them in a more real way than you ever could have imagined. So these are some things that the Holy Spirit was speaking to me and reminding me of through Alison's message. We're going to praise and worship a little bit more. Get the children and do the grab bag. Yes, we will do that with the children present.